Um, let's see, I think we're hopefully letting the participants in for this. I can't tell how many people we have logged on to our webinar tonight. I know it's a Wednesday evening here, and hope that everyone had an enjoyable holiday. I'm Gordon Lee. I'm a plastic surgery professor at Stanford, and welcome everyone to this webinar. So just a little bit of background. First of all, the California Society of Plastic Surgeons will be having their annual meeting this May. I'm sure we're all looking forward to that. We have Dr. Hoffman, the president of the CSPS, on the line with us today. And we also have some additional panelists that I wanted to talk about. I wanted to just briefly talk about, first of all, our financial disclosures. I'm a consultant for Integra, but there's nothing that relates to our talk today. I don't know that we have any other relevant disclosures for our panelists. Do we have any disclosures?
I have I'll be referring a little bit to a chapter in a book, and that's it.
No problem. We appreciate that. So a couple little background things about this combined grant. So many of our people in the audience know that this year we have a combined grant between the CSPS and the PSF, the Plastic Surgery Foundation, and the CSPS Educational Research Foundation. So we were able to get this grant together. It's a $10,000 pilot grant. I believe the applications all came in by December 1st, and they're all being currently reviewed by the plastic surgery study sections. So this is a combined grant, the first of its kind in California. It's offered to all the California Society of Plastic Surgery members. It's a $10,000 award. We hope to continue to be able to award this annually. There'll be other grants that we're hoping to do later in this year, yet to be announced with some other of our sister societies. I don't want to announce it too soon until we finalize that. But this grant's come out, the application is passed. There will be another one coming in the next cycle. But in the spirit of this new grant opportunity for our California members, I wanted to put together this very nice webinar so that we can talk about what is involved in the grant writing process. And it doesn't matter whether you're in private practice, whether you're working at Kaiser, the VA hospital, or traditional academic practice. This combined grant is open to all CSPS members, and we hope that you'll take advantage of that now or in the future. So I mentioned that I'm a professor at Stanford, and I do a lot of microsurgery. I'm the current president for the Education and Research Foundation of CSPS, and currently the vice president for the overall CSPS. And my only disclosure is I've been the recipient to previous PSF grants. I'm joined today by some wonderful panelists who I think you'll all hopefully really enjoy hearing and learning from. We have Dr. Derek Wan, who's a professor and a Johnson & Johnson Distinguished Professor, Endowed Professor in Surgery. Did his residency at UCLA, Craniofacial Fellowship with Dr. Kawamoto, microfellowship as well at Changgung in Taiwan. He's been a faculty member since at Stanford since 2011. He has, at last count, over 353 peer-reviewed publications. Wow. And he's been the past recipient of a K08 award, as well as multiple federal grants, including an R01. And he is the current PSF study section chair for the basic science. I can only say that he's been incredibly productive as a faculty member here at Stanford, publishing, as you can see, a lot of papers every year. He's really just a brilliant surgeon scientist. So I'm very honored to have him here to speak about, what it takes to write a successful grant, because he's done that and then some. We also are joined by Dr. Heather Furness, who, again, many of you know Dr. Furness. She did her undergrad here at Stanford, medical school at UCLA, residency here at Stanford. She's been in private practice for over 30 years. She is the owner and co-founder with her husband of Plastic Surgery Associates and Allegro Med Spa, which is in Santa Rosa, California, a very busy and successful practice. She's also a clinical associate professor at Stanford. She is hold multiple leadership positions in the national organizations, and she has spoken nationally and internationally on all types of topics, including how to run a practice successfully, as well as all kinds of topics within aesthetic surgery. And she's also been very successful in writing a number of papers in collaboration with some of our residents here at Stanford. So I thought that she would also bring a very unique perspective as to the challenges as well as the benefits of doing research while you're in private practice. We also have, as I mentioned, Dr. Hoffman, who's Chief of Plastic Surgery at UCSF, as well as President of the CSPS. And I think maybe later we'll have Dr. Gosman, who's Chief of Plastic Surgery UCSD, as well as the President-elect for CSPS, and they'll be our discussants for the case. So without further ado, I wanted to stop sharing my screen. I believe, Dr. Wan, I believe you might be going first, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right? And then Dr. Furness will be speaking after Dr. Wan. So, and there'll be opportunities for questions and answers in the chat box. So please feel free to participate. Thank you again to our panelists.
All right, so are my slides up?
Yes, we can see your
Okay,
slide.
great. All right, yeah, so thank you for the invitation to talk a little bit about how to put together a research proposal, hopefully get funded through one of the many PSF grant mechanisms, in particular the CSPS, the new grant. Let's see. Yeah, so I have no relevant disclosures, although I guess after hearing what Dr. Lee had mentioned, I have received a prior MTF Biologics PSF grant in the past. All right, so I think when you first start considering putting together a research proposal for one of the PSF grants, I think one of the most important things is to make sure that you're addressing a topic that is high priority, that's important to the funding mechanism. And for the PSF, this is a list of all the high priority areas that they publish, that they're interested in funding research for. And you can find this information at the PSF website, and I've listed it down in the bottom right. But there are a lot of different areas relevant to plastic surgery that they're looking to fund research in, including tissue engineering, stem cell biology, fat grafting, breast reconstruction, ALCL, outcomes research. So there are a lot of different areas that you can focus your research on, but it's important that you try to address one of these high priority areas. You can put together the most fantastic grant, but if it doesn't address one of these high priority areas, it's hard to convince the funding mechanism to actually provide you funding to pursue that research. Along those same lines, as I mentioned, there are many different PSF grant programs that are available. And again, you can find all this information at the PSF website, which I've put in the bottom right-hand corner. There are two broad areas of research grants that we consider. There are pilot grants. These are smaller grants that provide $10,000 in funding for 1 year of research. And then there are larger grants like the National Endowment of Plastic Surgery, research fellowships, the PSF MTF Biologics Grant. There's also a new craniomaxillofacial research grant. These are larger grants which provide about $50,000 or more in research funding for 1 or 2 years. And I just highlighted the CSPS PSF Combined Pilot Research Grant, which is brand new. So over the past, this is about 6-7 years now, this is just a chart showing how many grant proposals have been submitted to the PSF. Generally, there are about 100 to 150 grant proposals submitted every year. In the blue bars down below, these are all the basic science grants, and on the top, the red bars, these are all the clinical grants. This is a chart showing, again, how many grants have been submitted over the past 6-7 years, as well as the amount of funding requested. I think what's astounding, though, is that the PSF has been able to fund anywhere from 19 to 32 grants each year, and that's a funding percentage of about 17 upwards of maybe 24%. And again, this is impressive because when you apply to other grant mechanisms like the NIH, sometimes you're dealing with single percent funding lines. And the PSF has been very generous in the total funding awarded. And last year was $550,000, but it's been up to $900,000. It kind of depends on how many grants are submitted each year. This is just a breakdown of all the different grant topic areas that were funded just this past year. So you can see there are a broad area of issues that are relevant to plastic surgery, breast being one of the most popular areas, but other areas like peripheral nerve, wound healing, tissue engineering, fat grafting, these are all areas that have been funded just this past year also. So if you're thinking about applying for a grant, it can be pretty daunting getting started with the process. So I kind of wanted to talk about some of the key things to think about as you're going through all the steps to putting together a proposal that hopefully will be accepted and funded. And again, I wanted to highlight the CSPS PSF Combined Pilot Research Grant. This is a new grant that was just started this year. This is looking to fund research projects that will advance the scientific knowledge and clinical practice of plastic surgery. So it's actually pretty broad. Pretty much anything that may improve clinical care or just even the basic science knowledge that's relevant to plastic surgery and be potentially funded through this mechanism. It's important to keep in mind eligibility. You need to have an MD, or PhD, full-time clinical or research position somewhere in California, and you or your sponsoring co-PI have to be a CSPS member. So unfortunately, if you're a medical student and you're looking to spend a year in the research laboratory, you may not necessarily qualify for this specific funding mechanism. So again, when you're thinking about starting to put together a grant proposal, you want to make sure that you fulfill all the different criteria. So I just wanted to kind of briefly show people where you can find this information. So this is the PSF website. Under the research tab, you can see all the different grants programs. And if up in the right-hand upper right, this is the CSPS PSF Combined Pilot Grant. So if you just click on Learn More, this takes you to the information page for that specific grant, and then you can just go to the Download Guidelines button. And this again shows you the criteria, the overall grant description, what they're looking to fund. And if you scroll down later on, you can see all the different sections, which you may or may not need to submit. I've also put this on the left-hand side, and in bold, these are kind of the key areas that I want to particularly focus on tonight: the biographical sketch, specific aims, and then the research strategy sections. Depending on what you're looking to investigate and whether you are doing clinical work or animal work, you may or may not need to include all the other different subsections. But the key things are really the specific aims page and the research strategy along with the biographical sketch. So with the bio sketch, this is an important component because it allows the reviewers to really assess whether you as the applicant have the skills, knowledge, and resources to complete whatever proposal you're submitting. You can get a blank template at the NIH website, and that's shown in the bottom right-hand corner. This was just a bio sketch I pulled from one of my grants that I submitted recently. Lots of different components, but it basically boils down to some main key areas. And if you just start at the very on the left-hand side, just the basic information, your name, where you went to school, that's pretty easy to fill in. And then there are three subsequent sections that you need to focus on: the personal statement, positions and honors, and then contributions to science. For the personal statement, this is typically a quick paragraph about who you are, what you're doing, what type of clinical work you're doing, and you want to highlight any experiences that you may have that may be particularly relevant to prove that you may be able to complete the grant proposal successfully. The positions and honors, that's pretty straightforward. Just talk about where you've done your training, maybe any honors or awards you may want to highlight. And then section C, the contributions to science. This is a variable section. You can have up to 5 main contributions to science. I think for many of the grants, especially in the PSF, probably 1 or 2 is sufficient, but you want to provide maybe 2-3 sentences on your specific contribution to science, which may be relevant to the proposal that you have. And then after that quick little paragraph, you then provide up to 4 citations that support whatever contribution to science you may be wanting to highlight. So again, for like a pilot grant, probably 1 or 2 areas of contribution to science may be sufficient. If you're applying for like an R01 with the NIH, you may want to have 3, 4, 5, up to 5 different contributions to science. Right, the next section is the specific aims page, and this is one of the most important parts of a grant proposal. Actually, many reviewers will actually say that they should be able to review your specific aims page. This is just 1 page, and once they read it, they should be able to know, is this really realistically a fundable proposal or not? So this is probably one of the most important things. Is basically making sure you put your best foot forward. So you have a lead paragraph at the top. This should be in a funnel shape where you start very general and broad, basically what the problem is. And if just maybe 2-3 sentences, talk about what are the limitations currently. And it all wants to funnel down to one clear hypothesis that's overarching for your entire proposal. You can then propose 2 to 3 specific aims. And these are each subsequent paragraphs, probably for a pilot grant like the combined CSPS. 2 specific aims is more than sufficient. If you're doing one of the bigger grants like the NEPS grant or the MTF Biologics grant, you may want to have 3 or even 4 specific aims. But within each specific aim, you can have a sub-hypothesis. Each specific aim should be concise and focused and provide clear results that test your overarching clear hypothesis, though. And in this section on the specific aims page, you want to focus on what you're doing and why you're doing. You want to focus less on how you're doing that. And so you don't necessarily need to incorporate animal numbers, power analysis, statistical analysis, and things like that. But you want to make it clear to the reviewer why you're looking at the problem and what you're going to be doing in each specific aim. Following that is the research strategy, and this is the variable section for a CSPS PSF combined grant. This is a 6-page limit. For some of the bigger grants like the NEPS and the MTF Biologics grant, you can have up to 12 pages. So I provided a couple different guidelines depending on how long of the section you have. For the significance, this can be 1 to 2 pages depending on if you're putting together a 6 or a 12-page research strategy section. But this should focus again on providing the reviewer with some background. Again, you want to do this in a funnel strategy where you want to basically present what the problem is, highlight the incidents, elaborate potential financial costs to the healthcare system. And then following this, you can discuss current treatment options and highlight some of the limitations in some of these options. Following this, you can then present some of the literature that's out there regarding maybe some of the ideas that you have for how you may solve this problem and what you're going to be investigating in your grant. And all of this, again, should naturally lead the reviewer to your hypothesis, which should make obvious sense if you've written the first couple of paragraphs clearly for the significance. Following this is the innovation section, and this can be either half a page, typically if I'm putting together a 6-page proposal, or 1 page if I'm doing a full 12-page proposal for the research strategy. In the innovation section, you want to highlight novel techniques or approaches or analytic methods that you may be applying in your proposal. Highlight some novel concepts and treatment paradigms. This can be something like, typically the standard of care is following a disease process radiographically, but maybe you're going to be proposing evaluating a brand new biomarker that you've discovered, and this may be more sensitive. So you definitely want to highlight something like that because it will highlight how innovative your proposal is, and that increases enthusiasm in the reviewer. So for the approach section, this is anywhere from 3-4 pages or so up to about 9 pages, depending again on what type of funding mechanism you're applying for. But I break down the approach into 4 broad areas: preliminary data, experimental design, anticipated results, and then pitfalls and alternatives. The preliminary data section should include your own data. It can be published or it can be unpublished. All these proposals are confidential, so you don't have to worry necessarily about somebody reading this and scooping you. At least they shouldn't. But the preliminary data should incorporate some of your own findings, or maybe if you're joining a laboratory, the laboratory's findings that may help support some of the proposed experiments that you have. And really you want to prove to the reviewer that whatever experiments or things that you're going to be looking at are feasible. So this is why preliminary data may be very important. The experimental design section will then be actually what you're going to be doing in each specific aim. It should be clear what data that you're going to be generating in the experimental design section and how this will apply to validation of your hypothesis. It definitely should include analytic tests, statistical analysis. And then following this, you want to have a section on anticipated results. This will help reinforce the data that you expect to generate and how this will test your hypothesis. And it also kind of shows to the reviewer that you're actually carefully thinking about the experiments that you're proposing. Finally, in the approach section, you want to have a pitfalls and alternative section. You should always include this because, again, this tells the reviewer that you're carefully thinking about your approach. We all expect that everything we propose is going to work 100%, but in real life, this never happens. So you want to have some backup plans to kind of help de-risk your proposal. So in case a couple of the sections may not be successful, you want to have some backup alternative strategies to help answer the exact same question that you may have. And then finally, in the summary future direction section, this should be approximately half a page or so. This will help emphasize what you're investigating, the data that you're going to be generating, and it'll also provide a roadmap for future directions. And it will also help enhance the significance of the minor reviewer, because you can talk about, if X, Y, and Z are successful in this proposal, you may next plan on moving to either large animal studies or maybe even proposing a clinical trial. And then I also like to incorporate a little Gantt chart at the very end. This is just a chart showing the timeline of when I expect to complete each different section. So it proves to the reviewer that I can realistically accomplish all the things that I'm proposing in the timeline that I'm proposing. All right, so once you submit the grant, I think a lot of people have questions about what happens and how do we decide whether a grant is funded or not. So once you submit the grant, as Dr. Lee alluded to earlier, it goes to a study section. And this is a collection of your peers, other scientists, researchers that are out there that have some experience reviewing grants. Each proposal gets assigned 2 or 3 different reviewers, and we get about a month to review the grant. And we basically go through all the different sections, and these are the key areas that we are looking at and scoring. So we're looking at the overall impact, the significance, the investigators, innovation, approach, and environment. And then there are some additional review considerations that are also in the back of our mind regarding animal and human subject provisions, resubmission, response, your budget, and then your overall project duration. This is how we score grants. Just like the NIH, we have a 1 to 9 scale, 1 being the highest, 9 being the lowest. If you have basically no weaknesses or minor weaknesses, this falls into the upper categories, the 1, 2, or 3s. The 4 or 5s, typically these are grants where we find some moderate weaknesses, and then 7, 8, 9s, these are where we find some major weaknesses. And each section gets scored with one of these numbers, 1 to 9, and with significance. Basically, we're looking at why do we care about the proposal and what you're investigating. Some of the common problems that we see with significance are that the proposal may not advance the science, it may lack a compelling rationale, or may only provide incremental low impact research. If you're proposing to study a genetic disorder where there are 10 people in the world, may not have the greatest significance. But if you're looking at a problem where there are 500,000 people that suffer from that problem every year, then that has much greater significance. So when you're thinking of solutions, you always want to consider the size of the target population, how your proposal may improve knowledge or enhance patient outcomes. Investigator sections, this is basically, we look at the biosketch. We basically see, are you equipped to potentially complete the proposal? Some of the common problems that we see are inadequate expertise in the field or approaches that you're proposing. You may have a low publication track record. You may not have sufficient collaborators, especially if you're proposing things that you don't have much expertise in. Or if you are proposing collaborators, you may not have a sufficient track record. If say you're in your proposal, you're going to be working with a pathologist and you've published nothing with them and have shown that you've never worked with them, then a reviewer may look at that with a little skeptical eye. So you want to pick collaborators that you potentially have maybe written a review with or something at the very least. Some of the solutions also, you want to frame your proposal around the expertise of a laboratory or a researcher that you may be working with, or around your own expertise. If you don't have the expertise, you may want to provide detailed letters of support from your collaborators, which will exactly specify they're going to be helping you out on X and Y in the proposal, and you're going to be doing Z, or vice versa. And if it's a bigger grant, that may be the NEPS grant, or maybe a 2-year MTF Biologics grant, you may want to make sure that you have built into the budget a little bit of percent effort for you and other key personnel to really show that you're going to be dedicated to completing the proposal. I think for a pilot grant like the CSPS, where there's $10,000 in a 1-year funding, it may be a little bit harder to set aside money for percent effort, and you may want to save it more for your animals or reagents or analysis costs. With the innovation section, some of the common problems we see are again, the proposal may only provide incremental advancement, and you may not be incorporating any novel techniques. Some of the solutions that have been proposed include making sure that you challenge current research or clinical paradigms. Any novel techniques or interventions that you may be proposing, you definitely want to highlight that to the reviewer. And again, you want to think about how your proposal is going to advance the field. With approach, this is one of the more important areas, which I think feed into the overall score that a reviewer will commonly give. I think approach and significance are the two main areas, actually. So in approach, some of the common problems that we see are either too much unnecessary detail or not enough detail. So if you're proposing standard experiments like histology with H&E staining, you don't need to provide all the details about fixation, the thickness of the sections, how much time you're going to be spending on each stain. But if you're proposing new techniques like single-cell RNA sequencing with single-cell attack sequencing or something like that, you may want to provide a little more detail in your approach to prove to the reviewer that you actually understand the technique that you're proposing to use to answer your hypothesis. Another common problem is not enough preliminary data to establish feasibility. And then overambitious aims. These grant funding mechanisms, especially for the pilot grant, is just for 1 year. So if you're proposing that you're going to get 100 different clinical specimens from 5 different institutions, and you're going to be analyzing them using 5 or 10 different techniques, that may be a little that's going to be definitely overambitious to complete in 1 year. And then domino aims, that's another very important problem that we typically see. If you have 2 aims, you want to make sure that the aims are interrelated but not interdependent, meaning that if aim 1 fails, you still want to be able to show an aim 2 that may still be accomplished, that you can still accomplish. An example of this may be if you have, say, an aim 1, you're going to create a scaffold and identify something that may be appropriate. And then aim 2, you're going to use that scaffold to deliver a drug. Obviously, if you have no success in aim 1 and you're not able to identify a scaffold, then you're not going to be able to even do aim 2. Some examples of aims that may be related but not interdependent, maybe you want to identify all the different clinical characteristics of a disease between men and women. And then in aim 2, you may want to compare histopathologic differences. Or maybe you want to, in aim 1, evaluate the adoption or acceptability of like a virtual reality training program. And then aim 2, determine how the use of a virtual reality training program can affect postoperative outcomes. So in each of these last 2 examples, aim 1 and aim 2 are related to an overall global overarching hypothesis, but then they're not necessarily interdependent on one another for success. And then some final thoughts for approach. Make sure that you have appropriate controls. Always have at least a few sentences for power analysis. And this should be based on your preliminary data. Whatever differences you see in your preliminary data, just make sure you have a few sentences to justify why you're looking at X number of patient samples or using so many animals, because that will be important to enhance the rigor of your approach. And then finally, no discussion of potential pitfalls, stream solutions, expected data, or missing statistical analysis, interpretation of data. Those are also some common things that we see. For the environment, I think most institutions in California aren't going to have this issue. But some of the things that you can run into is if, say, you're a resident and you're spending some time in the lab, you want to make sure that you have a letter from your chair or your program director, basically ensuring that you have protected time to complete the research. And if you're joining a lab of a senior scientist and say you're doing a pilot grant, it'd be nice that in the letter from the main researcher, the PI, that they at least make some reference to additional funding that they can provide to you to ensure completion of the project. Finally, these additional review considerations that we look at, if you're dealing with human subjects, anytime you're dealing with protected health information, you're probably going to need to address these key areas of risk to subjects and potential benefits, et cetera. And you can find a decision tree at the website down on the bottom right at the NIH that can help determine if you need to complete any of these sections. For animal subjects, anytime you're using animals, you need to have some statements about the procedures themselves, a couple of sentences about animal justifications, why you need to use the animals or specific transgenics, and then a couple of sentences on minimization of pain, distress, and euthanasia. With the budget, this again depends on the funding mechanism, and it's very important to read through the instructions carefully for the CSPS combined PSF grant. Again, that provides $10,000 in funding for a pilot grant. When we review grants, we're not going to give you any bonus points if you only ask for 5,000 as opposed to 10,000. So typically, especially for a pilot grant, for $10,000, we build the budget in to basically cover the full $10,000. It may be difficult to provide your own salary support for in this budget, given a $10,000 max budget. But for some of the bigger grants like the NEPS or the MTF Biologics, you can build in a little bit of salary support. For most of the proposals that I usually put together, we deal with many animals. So you basically need to know how much does it cost for purchasing of the animals, housing of the animals. You don't have to provide exact dollar amounts, but just ballpark. So you can have a budget, say $2,000 to $3,000 for animal costs and housing and care. And then you may want to build in an additional 5,000 or so for reagent costs like histology or ELISA kits. And then maybe $1,000 or $2,000 for analysis, using like a CT scanner or whatever statistical tools that you may need to pay for. And then finally, project duration. Again, this goes back to the scope and how many specific aims that you may have for a combined pilot grant. Again, you may want to focus just on 2 specific aims because you don't want to be over ambitious in proposing too many different things that may not be feasible within the time limit of the funding mechanism. All right, so that's all I had to say, and be happy to take any questions after Dr. Furness.
Thank you, Derek. That was really a great presentation and very, very thorough. Obviously, it looks like a lot of work goes into the grant writing process. I mean, you had a lot of details in there. How long would you say on average it takes to write a grant? I know that's kind of a vague question, but how long does it take to write a grant like that?
I think for a pilot grant that's 6 pages, I think a good recommendation would be to target maybe about a month. And that allows you to put together your specific aims. And then we always recommend having your colleagues take a look at your specific aims page. It's just 1 page, so I don't think it's a huge burden for somebody to quickly look it over and to help you shape some of your specific aims. And you can go back and forth with a few different people over the course of 1 to 2 weeks. And then once you hammer down your specific aims, then you can then complete the remaining research design method section. I think for a bigger grant, like the NEPS that takes 12 pages for the research design method, you may want to maybe budget in 6 weeks or maybe 2 months. And then depending on which institution you may be at, some of them have deadlines of, we always say the CSPS deadline is December 1st. But for our institution, for example, at Stanford, you need to turn in the grant a week before to get all the necessary signatures to sign off from all the other people at the university that will be handling the funds once they come in and overseeing your research. So you always got to keep that in mind also.
Dr. Wong, another question. What is the range in acceptance rates? So I'm sure it varies according to type of grant.
Yeah, I don't have the type of grants broken down for the percentages. The only thing I've been provided from the PSF are just the global acceptance rates, and that has ranged anywhere from, again, 17% as high as 24%. Which again is much higher than a lot of other funding mechanisms like the NIH. So the PSF is fairly generous, and I think it comes through collaborations with other foundations like the CSPS, where they're able to provide so many funding opportunities.
It looked like there was a drop of I don't know, 25 or 30% from 2021 2022. Was that because there was less money available, or was it that you didn't find as many proposals to be worth funding?
I think that just more reflects the number of applications received. I think the percent funded rate has been fairly stable over the years, in that 17 to 24% range, and then that factors into how much they actually provide.
The thing you showed was like more like 23, 24, 23, 24, then 17.
Yeah.
So that's like a drop of, about 25%. And the
Yeah.
amount of money awarded was a similar drop.
Mhm.
This past year. I was just curious.
Yeah, I don't sit in on the research oversight committee meetings. Once the review is done at the study section, we get a composite score. Basically, everybody in the room votes after the presentation is done. We then submit the scores to the oversight committee, and typically there's a number that they decide. And above that number, grants aren't funded. Grants scored lower, below that threshold, they fund, and I don't know how they make that decision.
The other question I had is, at the very beginning, you were saying what the criteria were for people who apply, and it seemed to eliminate people who would be in private practice, which is what Heather's about to talk about. So where do we stand with that? If
I
somebody
think-
had a good idea, so for a clinical, it'd be a clinical research project most likely, but somebody had a good idea for a clinical research project, and they're asking for money, say, to pay a statistician or whatever, then how would that work?
Yeah, I don't know how strict they are when it comes to the definition of the institution. I think if that is an issue, I would recommend just finding a collaborator that is at one of the local institutions in California that you may be able to go in together on the application.
That's great. Thank you again, Derek. That was awesome. I don't see any questions in the QA section, although more may come up. I know Dr. Furness, did you have any questions before your presentation, Dr. Furness?
No, I asked them. That was really great, Dr. Juan.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, Dr. Furness, Dr. Juan, please stay on the line. But Dr. Furness, if you want to go ahead with your presentation, we'd love to hear from you and your perspective, being in full-time private practice. What are some of the challenges of doing research in private practice? Why do it? And how you've been successful in publishing papers, despite being also a very, very busy practitioner and having a husband and family and all that to care for. So love to hear from your experience. So thank you again for being on the panel.
Great. Thank you so much for inviting me, Dr. Lee. It's a true honor. I'm really excited about this, and I learned a lot from Dr. Juan. So this is the private practice experience, and my only disclosure is I'll be referring a little bit to chapter 17 and the business of plastic surgery. So why would anyone do research as a private practitioner? It does cost money, it costs time, which is money. And when you're in private practice, you're not after promotion, to get to the next level in the ladder of the hierarchy, nor are you fighting for a raise. But what do you do with those ideas? You're at a lecture or at a meeting, and you can do it better. You listen to the people on the podium, and you can do it better, and it's frustrating to just sit there and maybe complain to the person next to you. So do you have questions? Then find the answers. And Dr. Wan and Dr. Lee and Dr. Hoffman, we're talking about collaborating, and that really can help you get a project off the ground, and it's fun. Publishing also helps you establish your expertise. You can take the original article or description of the article and post it on your practice website, put it in newsletters, put it on social media. You can hand out the original article copy to patients as they come in or as folders. So what makes a good research question? Dr. Wan gave a really great description, and from the private practitioner's viewpoint, I would say, what interests you? What questions do you have about what you're doing? And it can be clinically, but it can also be non-clinically, practice management. What are holes in the literature? What procedure do you want to be known for? You can be strategic about this, and then narrow and simplify the question. You can solve a problem, come up with an innovation. This can be clinical, but it doesn't have to be. You can survey patients, but you can also survey your colleagues. You may want to develop a product or investigate a product or a device. And you can also look into practice management. What do you do every day, and what are your frustrations? What have you noticed that others haven't written about? What technique that you use over and over could be improved? And what are you passionate about? Choose something important enough for others to consider changing their practice. That level of interest will help your paper get published. One thing that I have felt has been really educational for me is to volunteer to be a peer reviewer for one or more plastic surgery journals. You can see what good papers are. You can see what not so good papers are. You can see a well-designed study and one that's not very clear. And you can see anonymously other reviewers' comments, and that can help you look at papers through a more sophisticated eye. There are definitely challenges to doing research in private practice. One is applying for grants. And thank you, Dr. Wan, for explaining to us how to write one. You can recruit residents and fellows to do some of these things. And so that collaboration can really help get your paper forward. There are some projects that should be reviewed by an institutional review board. And this is a somewhat onerous process. You can team up with a university faculty member to get an IRB through the university. But if you choose to do it on your own privately, then you pay somewhere around $3,000+. One private company I've worked with is Western IRB. And again, you can recruit residents and fellows. There is a literature paywall that a lot of us don't really think about until we leave the university. You find this great article that happens not to be one of the journals and that, you know, through ASPS or the Aesthetic Society. Maybe it's a derm paper or a reconstructive paper that isn't a PRS or ASJ, and they charge $30 or $35, and that can be onerous. So that's where also recruiting residents and fellows can be helpful, because they still have that access to the university. And then statistics, and Dr. Wan mentioned that. I took statistics way back when. I didn't like it, and I'm no good at it, and I've recruited residents and fellows to help with that, but not every resident and fellow is really a master in that. And I think this is a big hole that we have that potentially our national societies could help us with. CSPS can connect you to faculty, residents, and fellows for collaboration. So if you're feeling alone, just contact CSPS, and they've got all kinds of connections with the various training programs. Now, next, I'm going to show you examples of papers that I have done in private practice that are affordable. They answered a question, and they're a combination of clinical and non-clinical papers, none of which were supported with a grant. So here was the impact of a plastic surgeon's gender on patient choice. I called Dr. Lee, and he connected me with the first author, who was a medical student at the time. And this paper came out of a conversation with one of my patient coordinators, who just commented that a lot of patients really wanted to see me because I am a woman. And that surprised me because everybody loves my husband. And so it turns out that the first question the patient coordinators asked was, do you prefer a male or female surgeon? So we developed a study based on that. Here's another survey-based paper. I noticed that a lot of the articles being published about social media were saying what plastic surgeons should post, but it was plastic surgeons looking at other plastic surgery papers, and nobody had really asked the patients. And in private practice, the private practitioner trying to build his or her practice is really gearing a message towards the patient, not other plastic surgeons. So we surveyed patients that came into our aesthetic practice to see what what different apps they used, and what they would like to see in a plastic surgeon's feed. And it turns out that they contradicted some of the already published papers. They wanted to see before and after photographs, and they wanted to see reviews. They were not interested in scientific papers. Now, this is another one that was very much a Stanford publication with Rebecca Garza, who was a resident at the time, and Jane Weston, an alum and affiliated with Stanford. And so we sent out a survey to program directors. This did not need an IRB. We were just asking program directors about their pregnancy support, and there was no cost other than our own time. And I did find out that surveys done through societies are costly. So they range in plastic surgery societies, $1,000 to $2,500. So that's one reason to just go directly through email or social media. Now, this was a clinical paper, and this was also survey based. And because it was a survey given to patients, it was a routine part of my care and did not determine any part of their clinical care. I said it did not need an IRB. IRB, and the reviewers did accept that. And the cost for this was, again, staff time. This was a follow-up paper, and I gave the survey preoperatively and also postoperatively. And because I performed surgery in between, I did think that an IRB might be necessary. And so I applied through Western IRB, and Sarah Sariche Burke helped with putting that together. It was a lot of paperwork, and it was costly, and they did exempt it. So don't keep your great ideas to yourself. Go forth and publish and have fun and collaborate and make a name for yourself. Thank you. Any questions?
That was great. It's a good contrast, and about how much you can do not being in a university setting. Although obviously you have depended some on Stanford residents.
Yeah, well, and that's just it, that they're that if you're doing a paper in private practice, it is a great opportunity to work with the residents and fellows. It's great for them because they can get a little feel of what you can do in private practice. And I've had a great time working with the residents.
We have a similar, like Ron Gruber, who's on our clinical faculty, well known for rhinoplasties, has done large, I don't know how many, but a good number of papers with our residents over the years, and on different techniques and some review of results and stuff like that. Similar.
Yeah,
approach.
that's great.
No.
Yeah, I
it's,
just wanted to,
Dr. Juan, please, sorry, go ahead.
oh, no, I just wanted to kind of echo the importance of collaboration because, you know, even here, when I do my basic science work, I don't think of the 300 plus papers that you said I've published. I don't think I have a single author paper. I've published with several people I've worked with, you know, all throughout every place I've been. I've published several papers with you. Unfortunately, I haven't had the privilege of publishing with Dr. Furness yet, but hopefully at one point we'll collaborate on a project.
It'd be great.
One other thought I had also, I guess when you collaborate with people at universities, you can get through that paywall and see some of the papers. But one other trick for people out in private practice, if you are looking at an article that you want to potentially read and you don't have access to, like in a dermatology journal, you should not be afraid at all to just email out to the corresponding author, just email them cold. I think a lot of people are very generous in sharing the details of their study. And even if they're not, from a selfish standpoint, if you end up giving somebody else details of your paper and they write another paper and they cite you, that is only going to come back to help yourself. So for anybody out there, if you want to see a paper and you don't have access to, don't be afraid to just email out to the corresponding author. And most of the time they will give you whatever details or a version of their paper for you to read.
That's a great suggestion.
Yeah, I think that the teamwork, that really does help a lot, because writing these grants and doing the projects, it's really hard for any one person to do. And, you know, we're fortunate in academic practice to have residents, students, and fellows who are interested. But really, I mean, they're looking to do projects with anyone who has a really good idea, whether it be in academics or whether it be in private practice or at Kaiser or anywhere. And so I think just being, you know, comfortable reaching out, as you said, Heather, I remember you emailing me years ago saying, hey, I have these really great ideas. Would there be a resident interested in working with me? And I said, oh, absolutely. They'd love to work with you. And, you know, it's obviously been incredibly productive for both you and our residents. So we really have enjoyed that partnership. And I think, again, with your experience, you know, you're able to ask questions and answer them in ways that I think would be difficult for, you know, certain academic places to answer and address because of the nature of your practice. So it's really great to have that partnership. I was wondering, Dr. Furness, so, you know, as we talked about before, you know, it's not easy getting to do this. So, I mean, but we know that there have been some pretty successful folks like yourself. I know Dr. McGuire and Glicksman, who've been working on ALCL, are both in private practice, but they've contributed a lot of information to ALCL. So it really is, I guess, you know, it's hard to get started, I guess, to want to do this. But do you have any, like, you know, if I'm in private practice and I'm thinking about a project, like, where should I start? Where would it be a good place to start?
Well, I think just finding an experienced colleague is really helpful. And, you know, I know the Stanford faculty and Jim Chang, you yourself really helped. Rod Rourke was extremely helpful. Fuad Nahai, you know, because the editors-in-chief themselves can really be helpful. So I think just reaching out, asking, and you know, and asking to be connected to people. And it's amazing, once you make one connection, you meet other people, and it kind of snowballs. So it's I think it's just feeling. I've Josh Corman, who is also an alum, and I have said that we're really good at sort of keeping ourselves young, because we try things, we have no idea what we're doing. And so it does make you feel like you're in 7th grade again, you know, like, how do I do this? And it makes it fun, it makes it exciting. And I think private practice can become routine. And I think that the research element makes it a lot more exciting. And it just makes you look at your own private practice through different eyes. And, you know, what can I do better? What are other people doing? What type of comparison can I do? Am I doing something that I think is good? Is it really good? So I think it just, it makes practice a lot of fun.
I think the other thing too is that I would imagine maybe some people might be concerned reaching out to an academic institution that perhaps there's a concern or fear that the academic institution might want to take over the project or claim some kind of ownership. But it's clear that, you know, it's your patients, this is your data. This was not a Stanford project per se. This is your project, but you had some help with some of the residents to be able to do some of the chart reviews and things and statisticians and stuff. But it was clearly your practice, your project. It was not in any way usurped by the academic institution. So I think that's good.
Absolutely. And, you know, particularly I've got an aesthetic practice, so it's unique from, you know, within sort of the Stanford Medical Center walls.
And have the patients, by the way, seen some of the papers you published? Like, has it helped your practice that you've published and are somewhat of a, you know, basically an expert having published these papers?
Yeah, it's more, you know, the clinic course, you know, social media, that's not going to be anything that I would, or, you know, I've written a reviews paper, what to look for. So those types of papers are not helpful, but the labiaplasty papers really, I think patients are really excited that I take such an interest. And then I have asked a lot of them to do various, you know, surveys and videos and all kinds of things. And every once in a while they'll say no, but for the most part, they really feel like they're contributing to the benefit of society at large.
If I could just interject, you know, we only got a couple minutes left and we don't have a large number of people in attendance, but if any of you want to ask questions, now's the time. We don't, since we're just talking to each other at the moment. Here is one question from Jorge. Thank you. Do you have any advice for new faculty trying to start new collaborations with a group you don't know but are very interested in working with? Any do's or don'ts? Thank you. Maybe Derek, you want to take that? New faculty starting trying to get new collaborations with people who don't know you.
Yeah, I think, you know, if you're joining an institution and you got some new ideas, but don't necessarily have any experience working with the people there, I think one of the most important things first is kind of see what they've been researching. You don't want to necessarily propose a research project and collaborate with them on a field that they don't really know too much about. Like, you know, if somebody here at Stanford wanted to do a you know, basic science research project related to peripheral nerve with me, you know, that's not an area of expertise, but I can certainly refer people to, you know, people who do have that expertise. So I think first getting an idea of who may have interest in that field would be important before approaching somebody. But I think in general, most of us are very interested in working with new people with new ideas. I think if you keep working with the same people over and over again, or you don't have collaborators, you end up getting stuck in your own ideas. And so I think you shouldn't be afraid of approaching new people.
I point out also, if you're like Derek, you're great at like bridging the gap between basic science and clinical work. But you know, if you're, I don't know about your particular questioner's particular you know, area, but if you're primarily clinical, a lot of times people who do all basic science love to have somebody that's clinical to work with, where they can see the practical applications of what they might be working on. And so if you can find the right person for that, that can be a very fruitful way of joining forces.
Well, I think our time is up at the moment. Any last closing remarks for the session, Dr. Hoffman?
No, I think this is useful. I know I'm sorry there's such a small attendance, but you know, I think that these are the people who are interested. So that's good. I hope we have helped you guys at least get on the road, to success in doing research. I noticed there's one person who has a name that might be Heather's daughter. No,
No.
who's Priscilla Canales?
She's a phenomenal student researcher.
What's that?
She's a phenomenal student researcher working and collaborating with our research group on clinical.
Related?
Not related, but
Not related. Oh, okay.
Oh,
there may be something ancestral. We have to do a 23andMe testing of that.
yeah. Good idea.
Not Paco's niece or anything.
Oh,
Okay,
Right, exactly.
okay.
Mr. Furness, any other closing thoughts or remarks?
No, thanks so
Well,
much.
thank you, guys. We
Dr. Wong?
really appreciate you taking the evening to do these presentations, which were both great.
I would
Yeah,
also
thank you
say-
for,
Go ahead, Dr. Juan.
oh no, I just wanted to thank you for inviting me to give my presentation.
You guys were all great. And also the session is recorded. It will be posted through the CSPS website and offered to our members. So, although we may have had a bit of a modest group on the live session tonight, there'll be opportunities for people to watch this at home at their leisure. So I think hopefully we'll get a bigger audience. And, this is the first time that we've offered this combined grant. This is the first time that we've offered a webinar on research. And I think that this is something that as California plastic surgeons, we have so many resources in California. We have so many plastic surgeons in California who have so much to offer research and education that it's a shame, not to take advantage of some of these resources and be able to, and do investigative work, look at our theories, look at our outcomes, share that, publish it, present it. We have so much to offer, I think, in California. So I really am looking forward to seeing how this pilot grant session goes, our annual meeting in May, which is another great place to network with your fellow colleagues and get some ideas on research. And I look forward to a future webinar, which I hope to have again in the future, discussing something related to education and research. So thanks again, Dr. Hoffman. Thanks again, Dr. Furness and Dr. Juan. Really appreciate you all being here. And thank you for those of you who are listening.
Great.
All right.
Thank you. Have a nice night.
Thank you. Good night.